Greetings of peace, or as we say in my part of the world, Assalamu alaikum. It's a great privilege and an honor, and obviously a joy to be able to just share a few thoughts with you. I want to give a special thanks to our distinguished and His Excellency, the Ambassador, Observer, Mission of the Sovereign Order of Malta to the United Nations, for creating this space for this very, very critical and important consultation, reflection, and specifically entitled Youth Voices on Sustainable Development. And the subtext here is extremely important: a case for stronger faith-based youth engagement to address climate change. My name is Azza Karam, and I have the distinct privilege to serve a movement that is unique in its kind and intention, ambition, and aspiration, and has been so for the last 50 years. I speak specifically of Religions for Peace. For those who may not have heard of us, we are like the United Nations of religious institutions. As the United Nations has member countries or governments, Religions for Peace has member religious institutions and faith communities. It is the only such entity with that kind of representativity. The original idea was to come together in 1970, a whole group of religious leaders, each representing their religious institution and faith community, coming together with one intention only, which is to support the global community, to support the United Nations, to support all the governments in order to assure sustainable human development, peace and security, and human rights for all, and especially accounting for the most vulnerable. 50 plus years later, our planet is burning, literally. There are areas where people have no access to clean water, which is absolutely essential for survival. And there are areas where people have no ability anymore to plant crops in order to gain food. There are areas which are suffering drought. There are areas which are suffering floods. Our planet is getting warmer and warmer, and this is spelling absolute sheer disaster for hundreds of millions of people around the world. It is also leading to increased migration to countries, some of which feel that they should not be receiving any more migrants. And we all know what tensions between host and migrant communities can and sometimes do look like. All of this in the midst of a COVID pandemic that has yet to actually leave us, and an anticipation of more violent conflicts taking place, already more than one in every single continent of the world that is already taking place, an anticipation of more than those, i.e. a dramatic loss of life for millions, if not hundreds of millions of people, and a dramatic loss of the quality of life for the remaining billions. We cannot continue like this. What I find really incredible, to be honest, is how it is that we can still look as current leaders around the world, especially political leaders. We can still look to only that echelon, only that level, the existing political leadership. We still look to them for solutions. The truth is, as everything around us demonstrates, our existing leadership of all institutions need help. To put it very diplomatically, they need help. I don't believe that we can do this as one distinct group alone, whether it's one group of nations or one nation, or it's one group of religion or one religious institution, whether it's one group of youth or another group of older. Honestly, none of us can tackle all these challenges alone. COP26 was, for lack of a better word, humbling. It was a disappointment, a bitter disappointment for so many who have dedicated their lives to trying to save this environment, without which none of us can exist. None of us can exist. What's the good news? The good news is, quite frankly, that all of us who serve in offices of leadership, traditional offices of leadership around the world, need the youth. Let me repeat that. All who serve in traditional leadership positions of any institution around the world need the youth. So it isn't about whether or not youth. It is about perhaps just thinking a little bit self-critically, because self-criticism or self-reflexivity is actually sometimes a very fine idea. But if we were to think a little bit self-reflexively, we would realize that perhaps many of our youth are engaging in remarkable ways, but some of those ways may be replicating the very same challenges that traditional leaders replicate. What do I mean? For instance, how mobilized globally, coherently, in a coordinated way are youth movements around the world? How differently do young people mobilize in ways that are different from the traditional models of mobilization, coordination, or rather lack of mobilization and discord? To what extent can we look to not just faith-based and faith-inspired youth, but to the whole of youth around the world? Yes, youth are extraordinarily diverse. Of course they are, just like the rest of us. What we're looking for here is not angels who can do things better, but perhaps we're looking for an aspirations to do things different. When I look at the Religions for Peace global worldwide youth movement, I am continuously humbled and inspired. These are young people from so many parts of the world, representing almost every faith tradition known to humankind, struggling to work together. And they are plagued by the same challenges that the rest of our world is plagued with. The challenge of being able to be understood amongst one another, to be willing not to be territorial, whether about their own organization or their own religion or their own community or their own institution, but to be non-territorial for the sake of the one territory that encompasses us all. They are also challenged by lack of resources. It is difficult to do so much with so little, and yet I think we can look to faith-based youth engagement as the site where, in spite of so many of these challenges, remarkable work and commitment are being done. Yes, of course it is important to engage faith-based youth. Why are we not? Why are we seeing faith-based youth as siloed from the rest of the youth communities? Why do we need to even begin to look at them as different from other youth? I think those of us in traditional spaces of leadership need to ask ourselves very critically whether we are in some way, shape, or form maneuvering that youth replicate the same mistakes that traditional leaders have done for a long time. One of the most impressive, mobilizing features of the leaders that today we claim and try to remember and try to emulate, whether it was Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, one of their features and claims to fame is that they didn't want to work as their own individuals. They were committed to working for, to serving others. They didn't want to look only to the context of their countries, but they wanted to look beyond because they understood that our planet and our humanity is extraordinarily interdependent on one another, but also, quite frankly, interdependent on the biospecies and everything else that lives in this world, whether it's grass or trees or oxygen or everything under the water. We are all incredibly interdependent. So the notion of trying to work together for the sake of the name of one, or for the sake of the name of a particular institution, is a self-defeating notion. I'd like to end with some very hopeful news. There is a worldwide effort from different religious leaders around the world to advocate for some very important changes that are fully in alignment with the dreams and aspirations of the Paris Accords, but also of what many, many around the world understand today is absolutely necessary. Many of these religious leaders, under the aegis of Green Faith and with the support of Religions for Peace, among many others, are asking and beginning to ask each other and their respective leaders for the following: an immediate end to new fossil fuel projects, an immediate end to deforestation, which is robbing us of our environment, a rapid transition to 100% renewables, and a fair phasing out of fossil fuels so that the vulnerable countries that are still dependent on them have time to make the transition, and support to these countries from those who do have the resources to make that transition. And if at all possible, a commitment by the historically largest emitters to a just, clean energy transition and to support for the affected communities and workers, as well as universal access to clean energy. You know, it's not that we do not know what to do. It is not that we don't have the resources. Yes, there is an ask for resources, 100 billion. And yes, we're struggling to put that together. It isn't because the resources are not there. It is because the will to commit those resources is not there. And the only way to be able to secure that will is to do what young people do very, very well inside their families, but also inside their communities, which is to hold accountable. Holding accountable, by the way, doesn't just mean naming and shaming. It doesn't just mean undermining efforts that are taking place. It also means being able to raise the issues of success, to commend those, whether they are groups, nations, institutions, whoever, to actually commend them, to acknowledge the good that is being done, to acknowledge the good efforts, the hard work that many are trying to do. Holding accountable is not shaming. Holding accountable is being able to say, thank you, just as you say, wouldn't it be a good idea to do that instead of that? I think that's what we're missing. And I think that's the only thing that our young people can possibly excel in doing, that holding of accountability. Of course, young people deserve a seat at all tables. But if we delay the demand of holding accountable, the exigencies of holding accountable until we wait for a seat at the table, we may find ourselves without a plan. By all means, urge and continue to urge, as many of you do successfully, for a seat at all tables of decision making. But at the same time, you young people are perfectly capable of creating your own tables of decision making. You young people have access to voice like no generation ever before. Use your voices to hold accountable. And please hold accountable not only governments and intergovernmental institutions like the UN and the European Union, the African Union, etc., but hold accountable also religious institutions, because they amass remarkable power and influence. Hold religious institutions accountable. And as you do so, hold them accountable to delivering, at least be the examples that they claim they cannot be because the political governance will not allow them to be. But we can. Religious institutions can be an alternative, especially when spurred on and acknowledged positively by the faithful and youth without faith. Hold religious institutions accountable as you hold governments and other political institutions accountable. Don't forget to hold religious institutions accountable, and hold them accountable to working together to deliver a better world, because that's what all divine messages are all about, from the indigenous to the largest institutions around the world, religious. So hold accountable, do it positively, be the leaders that you want to see. Thank you.